Okay. Yeah, there you go. Sorry about
All
that.
Don't have to have you explain what happened to the 10-second delay. Okay. So there's just getting back to the council responsibilities. So obviously they passed legislation, whether that's in the form of an ordinance or resolution. I'm not going to talk about vacation rentals tonight, if anyone was curious. Levies, every year we pass a levy along with the budget, and then we have contracts, franchise agreements, and other strategic plans that are all purview of that legislative function of the council. And then we have the executive side, which gets into really the management of the organization. So it's technology, it's centralized services, it's management, it's development of the budget. A lot of the things within that, when you look at what's described in the charter, falls into what I do on a daily basis. And so back in 2013, the council passed a resolution that that kind of describes, it does describe the authority that's invested in the county manager position and what those obligations are on behalf of the council, and I can talk about that.
That was a resolution and not an ordinance?
It's a resolution, Kevin. Oh, because it doesn't need to be codified. Okay, so getting back to functions. So my point is, how does this county work together under the charter? And so there's things that are common that knit the organization together. So everyone's under the same personnel policies. We have collective bargaining agreements that set forth compensation and other things. We have common training and common risk management. We came up with an idea a couple of years ago of centralized services. So everyone in the organization is served by the same IT, IS, GIS. There's a number of years ago, everyone was kind of doing their own thing, but this is really when we get into the efficiencies. Everyone participates in fleet. We call it ER&R, which is equipment, rental, and reserve. Facilities takes care of all facilities across the county, our county facilities. Public records, it's commonly done. And then we have other common features. So the prosecuting attorney's office, administration, we review contracts and agreements, participate in litigation, mediation, arbitration, and then we have the budget process, the development and implementation. So this is really kind of the infrastructure or backbone of our county government. So these things kind of force us all to work together. And by working together in all these areas, then it makes us really efficient. One of the other things I wanted to point out under the charter, how we work together, is really inputs in developing policies and plans. So whether it's the comp plan, it's the parks plan, it's the public works strategic plan, there's a whole bunch of inputs that go into that. And so we have department head retreats and meetings, we have budget development process, we have strategic planning efforts, cross-department initiatives, capital project development. We do council retreats. As you know, we have a ton of boards and commissions. They all have their own unique work program, and they have inputs into department workload. So all of these inputs help us create policy for the county. And so in some form or other, these inputs can end up in legislation, whether it's a resolution or ordinance. It's the county officially adopting a plan. But this is another way that under the charter that we all work together. It's also expressed, this is taken out of the budget book. And so every year when we do the budget, we're now on I know Mylene did a budget presentation, and we're now on a biennial budget. We laugh because the first year was a biennial budget. It was also the pandemic. So we thought it would be easier, but it wasn't easier because we had to rebudget last year, in part because of the CARES money that we received. But anyway, each year that we put the budget together, we also identify key goals that we want to achieve out of the budget. So the budget is hundreds of pages of numbers, but I always say that's not really the interesting part. It's what all of those numbers equate to mean. So it's really a roadmap for what we're doing and where we're going over the course of now 2 years. I don't really need to go through all of these. I do want to point out that, and Ron Sims mentioned this, our bond rating, we actually as a county have a really good bond rating. We have very low debt to our debt ratio. I think our debt is probably, well, we just borrowed more money to build a shop building, but I think our debt is probably around $15 million. So it's relatively low. We've also worked really hard to pay off debt over the last 6 years. And as a result, we actually have a very good bond rating for a small county. A lot to be said for continuous improvement. We kind of use a different name for it, but it's all things that we're doing to make sure that we can operate within our budget. So let me talk about the development budget process. So this was a change in the last charter. So the auditor is primarily responsible for the budget, but it's still a team effort. So even though Mylene is responsible for keeping all of the, as I always kind of joke, for keeping all the numbers in the right columns, it's really developed as a team. So there's an actual budget team that meets every year. And our budget process takes a long time. It's probably a 5-month effort to do the budget. Last year was terrible because we had to redo our budget mid-course, and that for a number of reasons with the pandemic and our guess as to what may or may not happen, we had to make some adjustments in the budget. But the process, again, shift to the auditor, but the auditor and I work collectively, and we usually pull in 2 other staff people to work on the budget. That's influenced. We do a council budget retreat every year. So we're like, council, what do you want to work on? Where do we want to go? So we get the policy input from the council before we sit down and develop the budget. It makes it so much easier. You don't want to develop a budget and then go to council and then have them say, well, that's not really the right flavor. It's not really where we want to go. So we get that input early. The team also sits down with each department and we review their preliminary budget, really their budget asks, to see what their needs are. And then we have the discussion about available resources. We do some forecasting. And then at some point we deliver the preliminary budget to council. And then at that point, when the preliminary budget is delivered to council, it really becomes their budget. And that's when we go through the budget process. And that's what you see if you tune into the council meetings, is when the budget's finally been adopted to them, and they go through the deliberative process. So here's the charter review, part of your 7,000s in the budget here. We also develop a capital budget. So a change under this charter is that we have a capital budget that reflects all county departments. Having a capital budget is actually required for a number of reasons. You can't spend REIT money, real estate excise tax, if you don't have an adopted capital budget. You can't spend road dollars unless you've got an adopted annual transportation improvement program every year. So there's a number of things that we're required to do capital budgeting, but my point is that we do it, and it includes all county departments, and there's a process. There's a capital team that goes through this, and then it's ultimately recommended to council. Obviously, a lot of boards and commissions. So let me turn to fiscal challenges, because I want to kind of echo some of the stuff that Ron said about adding things to the organization. So whether you're a county or a city in Washington, you've struggled with the budget over the last couple of years, and there's a number of reasons for that. The pandemic will create that. We have revenue sources that don't keep up with expenditures. But I wanted to point out that one of the challenges for this county is really keeping pace with the cost of expenditures. And so we have done a lot in the last couple of years simply to run in place to keep up with those. And so we did a voluntary early retirement program. We've probably reorged every county department that we have. We've done a number of across the board cuts. No one got a cost of living increase except for the sheriff's department in 21. We changed the wage scale. Our wage scale was really aggressive. It only had 7 steps. We elongated that to 11 and kind of reduced that annual growth in compensation. All of us took some reduction in hours or furloughs, and then we put a hold on new hiring. So when you think about the charter and adding departments or functions, I would echo what you've heard earlier today, is that really, it would be really important to get that costed out, and we can certainly help with that. It's easy for us to figure out what it would cost to add a person, what it would cost to add a department, or what it would cost to collapse departments together. And so under the notion of collapsing departments together, you may have an employee cost, but really you need to have a discussion of the underlying workload. So one of the things that we're really fortunate about, what we're fortunate about here in San Juan County, is that everyone's a working manager. So whether you're appointed or elected, you have a full workload. So it's really, the conversation is a little bit about money, but it's a lot about, if you're collapsing departments, are you losing the horsepower needed to do the work? And so I would offer that we're happy to help the Charter Review Commission cost any of that stuff out. So here's one of my favorite local government graphs, and this shows really the challenge that I was trying to talk about earlier on the expense side. So the problem for county government is we don't have all of the tools that the state or city governments have when it comes to revenue sources. And so you have this reoccurring cycle about every probably 5 to 7 years, depending on your government, of where your revenue and expenditures flip, and then you have to take some measures. So we have done a good job elongating the crossover, but it is something that we'll continue to struggle with unless we get some different resources from the legislature. So I guess kind of in conclusion, if we're happy to proof any of the costing stuff that you guys have or staffing stuff. Like I said, we're available to do that. So please let us know if you want that work done or have suggestions about or need suggestions about where you can get that stuff done.
Okay.
So that's just a real quick overview of what how we operate under the current charter and some of the stuff that we've been doing. So with that, Kevin, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, any questions for Mike?
That you guys have.
And Mike, if you could stop sharing for a moment, then I can
Yep.
see to call on him. Thank you so much.
Did that work?
Not yet.
Oh,
maybe 2 is the
got it.
magic number again.
There you go.
Okay, I see Olivia, and then just raise your hand. I've got David Dillendorf.
Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. So to kind of piggyback on just the last part of your presentation, what are the other resources that you think that the legislator could provide for other revenue streams?
Yeah, one of the so the county really through we call it Washington Association of Counties have long asked the legislature. There's a revenue flexibility bill. So there's a couple of things. So when it comes to property tax, there's a 1% cap on property tax. No one believes that when they get their tax bill, but there's a cap. There's a 1% cap. There's some exceptions to that. We can add in value of new construction, but there's very limited growth in property tax. Some time ago in Washington State, there was a 6% limit. What we would like is a limit. So what's been proposed to the legislation is a limit based on whatever the inflation, pick a number like what is inflation, then that should, so if inflation is 2.3%, then that should be the property tax increase for a year. There's some other funding mechanisms. So the real estate excise tax is great because we have a lot of real estate excise tax right now, but that form of tax provides great funding for capital projects. We use it to restore buildings. We use it for road projects. There's different forms of REIT, but it's capital money. What we'd like is some flexibility to use that money for operation and maintenance. So it doesn't do you a lot of good if you're adding capital projects and downstream obligations on maintenance and operation if you don't have the funds to do that. So those are two examples of what counties have been asking the legislature for flexibility for.
David
I have
Dillon.
one more question. What is the environmental resources program? You know, who are they? I just looked online. So more specifically, sorry, are they a paid position?
Yeah, so we have a couple people in that. We've got well, we have Kendra Smith, who's the manager of that department. And so we have the stormwater utility in there. We have the solid waste utility. We have Frances Robertson, and she has been really instrumental on programs related to southern resident killer whales. So she was our interface with state agencies. She provided support for Jamie Stevens when he was on the governor's task force. So she's worked with the ECHO program with Canada. The other thing she's worked on is oil spill. We just did a oil spill assessment. So really the question is, if there's an oil spill, how long would it take for there to be a response, you know, whether it's in Haro Strait or Turn Point or wherever. And so it was kind of a cross-border study. What else out of that program? We have another person in there who has more technical abilities, and so they help other departments that are doing projects with their environmental process. So as many of you know, when we do a project, it's not only our own regulations, but it's state regulations and permits that we need to do a project, and so they help with that. We have another person who works really kind of on restoration projects. So they work with like the land bank. So one of the big projects on this island is False Bay, the stream and False Bay itself. So they're restoration projects, and they work on that. So kind of a host of environmental stuff. And so what's unique is that we haven't had that in a consolidated package. And so they have dedicated funding, a lot of it's grant funding, and they get some contribution from the current expense fund for that effort.
David Dillendorf, and then Tom Starr.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but in some counties and cities, don't electeds, some of the electeds, maybe not all of the electeds, report up through the county manager? And if that is the case, in your responsibility of coordinating all the different county departments, is it possible that you would be able to more effectively do your job if some of the electeds were to report directly to you?
David, I'm not aware of a county where electeds report up through the county manager or elected. They're their own entity, and they work in cooperation with the rest of the government. I can't think of an example of where there would be a direct reporting connection.
Maybe it would be a county executive in that case that I was thinking of, instead of a county manager.
If they're independently elected, they are an independently elected official, and they do not report to another.
Okay, by definition then. Okay,
yeah.
Thank
so
you.
even like, you know, King County is a good example. So, you know, you've got whether it's a separately elected prosecutor or elections or whomever they have, they're kind of part of the team, but it's not a direct direct reporting requirement.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Tom Starr. And then Maureen.
Mike, thank you very much for the presentation and especially the visuals. I was exercising my screenshot button a whole lot.
Okay.
But my question is, if you have a beef or have some suggestions for charter improvements, what would be your primary one or two on your list?
Oh, the loaded question, Tom. Thank you.
You think?
You know, I'm going to equivocate here just right off the bat. I think, Tom, what makes us unique in this county is that we have seasoned elected, separately electeds that have worked here quite a long time, and they're all working managers. So I don't have like a beef with one of them. We all work. We are just in a really fortunate situation where we all work together. Having said that, I mean, there are other examples in other counties where they don't have as many separately electeds. They have combined financial efforts together, the auditor or the treasurer. It's not good or bad, like Ron said, it's kind of what your comfort level is. You know, for me, this position is unique because I have kind of co-budget authority. And frankly, you know, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't, but for the most part it does. But I'm going to get back to you on my list. But I will have some suggestions as you guys work through your effort here.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen.
Maureen, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mike. I think we'd all appreciate hearing from you what you would like to see us work on, because that would be really, really helpful. I have two questions. One is, you said there are 250 employees.
Yeah.
And so you've gone through some cuts this past year because of COVID and the desire to streamline your budgets there. Is it still 250?
Yeah, so that's 250 is kind of a equivalent. So you have to remember we've got part-time. We have folks like the Board of Equalization that work, you know, a couple hours a month. So effectively that number, like if you actual full-time people, it's probably down in the low teens, probably like 218 or so.
Okay, so you've reduced. It's definitely a reduction.
Yeah, we definitely reduced the number of positions, and we intentionally did so. We did a voluntary early retirement program. I tell you, one of the things that's really facing this organization is none of us are young anymore, so we're all very tenured, as I say. So the retirement train is picking up a lot of speed. So one of the things we have to work on is some recruitment and retention in really all of the departments.
That's been a song they've been singing a long time.
I know, and I'll tell you guys, we're really fortunate we live in such an awesome, beautiful spot, because I would say 90% of the employees that we get here have some connection to the islands. Like they've always wanted to live in the islands. Their uncle has a place here. Their grandparents had a place here. And so they have a really strong draw or connection to the islands. And so I'd say probably 90% of our employees have that connection. Just hired a brand new public defender, first full-time public defender.
Yeah.
And of course, his story was, I came here as a kid. My relatives have a place on Orcas, so I want to work here and I have a place that I can live. So that's a pretty typical story that we hear.
I just have one more question, if I may. Given the situation, would you prefer to be responsible for the budget as opposed to, since you oversee, you supervise most of the departments for whom you have to watch their spending, would it be easier if you did the budget?
I think there's kind of two questions there. There's the development of the budget, which takes really everyone's effort. And then there's the question of who is responsible for the budget, like during the course of the year, because whether you're a county government or, you know, a corporation, it's all of those decisions that you have to make during the year about, you know, expenditures and adjustments and things that come along that you have to decide. And so a lot of that's really relegated to the auditor's office, and sometimes it's not as smooth as it could be. But I don't want to throw Mylene under the bus because she's really good at her job. But
Yeah.
I don't think what I'm saying is what every county manager would say is, yes, I want budget authority. Why wouldn't I want that?
Sure. I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Jane, please.
Mike, thanks very much for the presentation tonight. This is very helpful. Just a couple quick questions. One is, what kinds of costs are involved in the boards and commissions that support the county government? Do they have a lot of expenses that draw on the budget of the county? So that's one question. Another question is, Mylene said in her presentation last week, as she realizes, or she's not running for re-election again, she said, you know, what I've recognized and realized is that the county is really exhausting additional revenue streams that it can tap into in the future. And so I was curious to know what you think of that, you know, and if we as a commission are going to be putting forward some recommendations that have cost implications, I mean, how difficult do you see things going forward? You can't read the crystal ball, but in terms of additional revenue streams for this county in the future. And the last question I had for you was, given that we have struck a subcommittee on justice and equity, and we had our first meeting as a group earlier this week, I'm interested to know, you know, what the county government does vis-a-vis issues of justice and equity, and in particular, as you were just mentioning, a lot of folks are going to be retiring from their jobs, and it would just be interesting to know where does this local government stand in terms of being representative vis-a-vis diversity and inclusion, and not sure what human resources policies there are around that.
Right. Well, okay. Another three-part question. Yeah, so I'm going to go backwards. So justice and equity, obviously, something much discussed over the last year. The council in 2020 adopted a resolution, just kind of an expression of inclusion. It was inclusion and equity, I think, or justice. And so it wasn't, what it was is an expression of here's who we are as the county. It didn't have a work program associated with that, but the council at the time thought it was important to say, hey, here's who we are and here's what we subscribe to. So that's out there. Part B to that was some staff follow-up. And so we have a very budding conversation across the departments about how do we, first, just from a employer county government itself standpoint, how in service delivery can we be inclusive? How can we make sure that we're reaching everyone in our community? And then also as an employer, how can we attract a more diverse workforce? I mean, as you would guess, we're not a diverse workforce. So there's a number of little efforts so in Wazoo Extension, they're looking at inclusion and equity and justice in some of their programming. Cindy Wolf, our new council member, is really interested in this issue. And so I'm going to work with her, and we're starting to outline an approach. It's just in its infancy. There's a lot of work to do. But what I really want, my goal in this is, like, I want to make sure that this county government is treating everyone fairly, and that we're recognizing who's in our community and our services are respectful of them and they have access to our services. So there's a lot of ways you can go with that, but that's kind of our initial approach. But that's a great question. On your revenue question, Are you asking if there's additional revenue sources that we haven't tapped into? Is that what?
Yeah, I mean,
could you-
she didn't elaborate, unfortunately, but the impression I was left with anyway was that you know, the county is constantly trying to be creative in terms of how you can be seizing on additional revenue sources from different sources. So I wasn't really clear on what she meant by that.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, we take advantage of all revenue sources. As you know, we recently went out for a levied lid lift to provide continued funding for a number of programs. We are actually really successful on the grant side. So we always say internally, let's use other people's money first. And so that's kind of been our mantra and approach. But I tell you, you know, I don't care what organization you're running. It's like you never quite feel like you have enough money. But you know, we have tapped every source that we can. The CARES money was super important that we got. I'm hopeful that we're going to get some additional federal funding. This year, we're kind of hanging out there. We have, just because of the COVID response, we brought a lot of temporary staff on. We probably have 50 or 60 volunteers, but we are spending money for that response that is stressing the organization. On your boards and commissions, they don't really cost us much. It's just a lot of, you know, we have staff that supports them, or most of them, and it's just a lot of really good people volunteering their time to, whether it's the planning commission or a ferry advisory committee or what have you. It's their time, thankfully, that they're providing us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bob and then Olivia.
Mike, I beg your pardon if you've already had this discussion, but the city manager be appointed or elected,
Should
Bob,
be
and why?
Should
Bob,
be
you were breaking up, but did you ask if the county manager should be appointed or elected?
Yes, I think I said the word city, but I meant county.
yeah, I think it. Yeah, so I took
Yes.
the question as, should the county manager be appointed or elected? Well, I think, again, it kind of depends on the county. I would say that in this county, it shouldn't be, well, I guess we're a small county. If you're going to have an elected county executive, then two things are going to happen. One, you're going to add cost because you're going to pay the county executive, but then you're going to need someone, chief of staff, whatever you want to call it. You need someone that has the experience to run the organization.
Right.
So you're going to turn around and hire someone like me to run the organization when you had an elected. The other part of that question is, what does it do to the structure of the charter? Because as in one of my slides, I said we've collapsed, you know, two branches of government together. So you would say, okay, how do we split that baby? And so the council goes back to just having its legislative authority, and the executive authority gets stripped out and goes over to the elected. So you've got a cost and a structure consideration if you go the elected route.
Olivia.
Thank you, Mike.
So in regards to the town of Friday Harbor, does it add to the deficit yearly, or does it help the fiscal budget? Fiscal budget.
Oh, the town?
Mm-hmm.
They don't really impact us.
It's a
You know, that they're our own government entity, unless I'm misunderstanding your question. We provide some contract services for them, but those are cost recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
yeah, no, we don't, and we couldn't provide them services that would be kind of at our taxpayers' cost, if you will.
Got it. Thank you.
Mike's last point is really important, which is if the county were to provide anything to the town of Friday Harbor and not have that cost recovery, it would be a gift of public funds, which isn't allowable. The best example that I found when I was the first year commissioner was, I was asking, well, why does our sheriff deal with stuff in the town of Friday Harbor? Because the town of Friday Harbor pays for it. So it's a wash. So other questions?
So my question is a
Yeah.
two-part question, but I didn't want to jump
Go ahead, Olivia.
into it. So because there are a couple different committees talking about individual cities, say Orcas was its own city, Lopez was its own city, would that be a benefit to the overall budget of the county to say, take some of the burden?
Here's my guess. And so if let's say if East Sound were to incorporate, so they become the town of East Sound, it would take a lot of tax money away from the county. So we'd lose a lot of lodging tax, we'd lose a tremendous amount of sales tax. So that would hurt, right? So we wouldn't be responsible for those citizens, but that loss of revenue would definitely have an impact on the county. However, if you're the town of East Sound, you would probably turn around and contract for services from the county. So it might be kind of a wash, but I think it would be a loss for the county. Well, I know it would be a loss for the county because we'd lose quite a bit of revenue.
Thank you.
I have Liz actually first, and then David Dillendorf.
Hey, Mike, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering what your thoughts are on how much the comprehensive plan influences, informs the budgetary process, budgeting process.
The comp plan does. The comp plan provides a lot of policy direction. So the comp plan is this compilation of, let's pick on the transportation element. The transportation element has goals and policies that drive our capital decision making. There's policies in the comp plan that are guiding our hands. So our focus for the last probably 5 years has been the development of 2 UGAs. So that's East Sound and Lopez. You've got a capital facilities chapter that talks about the provision of capital facilities throughout the islands. And so the comp plan is providing us with policy direction as to what we should be doing. So it does influence the budget. There is definitely a strong nexus between those two.
And just one additional thought on that. Is it your sense that that relationship is strong enough? I've just heard some comments that there's kind of a disconnect, and I just wanted your opinion on, is it strong enough, or is there a way that our process could strengthen that?
I think the process is strengthened through recognition. I would, to be self-critical, this county hasn't really recognized the policy direction in the comp plan. So it's a very recent thing. So it's there. We just need to rely on it better, frankly.
And is that something that we can influence? Is there something that we could?
You can certainly make that observation. I'm not sure how it would fit into the charter, but it could be something that you express in your recommendation.
Okay, I've just seen, my thinking was that that's the place where we hear the longest process and the most voices on what the community wants beyond direct voting.
Mhm.
So to find a way to have that be really attended to by all government, entities and budgets.
Yeah.
Is my thinking on the right track?
Yes, it is. It's a really, really important point that you brought up. And I'm not really sure what the appropriate avenue to express that is. But you've made a really important connection between the comp plan policies and development of the budget.
Okay, thank you.
It could certainly be an observation in your write-up or report to the council on
Okay, thanks,
your
Mike.
effort.
Okay, we've just got a few minutes left, and as I imagined, we haven't had Mike speak more in detail to his position directly. So we will have the county manager come back and give us a little more detail if you still feel that's necessary, Mike, or if you'd like to do that. But I'd like to go to David Dellendorf and then Bill Apple, and then maybe we can move on.
Mike, when you responded to the question about elected versus appointed, you said if it was an elected, you'd likely have to have an experienced assistant manager, or whatever that position would be called.
Right.
That kind of implies that we wouldn't have experienced candidates applying if they had to run for election. is that the case? If it were an elected position, would you unlikely be able to find a candidates who would run for election in our county that are experienced like you were with King County and other jurisdictions?
So part of this, so David, part of this gets into kind of a legal realm that I can't really speak to, but so what, for an elected position, what, what prerequisites what qualifications can you put on that you're not discriminating against, the whole population that might want to do that job. We require that the prosecutor be an attorney. We require the judges to be attorneys. But the other elected departments, we're not requiring them to have any previous knowledge of being an assessor or an auditor. So I don't know if you could be in a position where you would say you can only run for the county exec if you have 15 years of municipal experience. I don't know if that's legally possible. So that would be an outstanding question that should be asked. But if you can't do that, then you don't know who walks through the door. And I've worked for different county execs, and they have an amazing staff to get the work done. So there's got to be a resource there somewhere.
Well, related to that, would you have run for election as county manager if that had been the case?
No.
Yeah, that's a concern I would have, because people.
No, I would not. I would
Sure
go elsewhere.
So, okay, so we're gonna go to Bill Apple, and then Kyle gets the last question. Bill Apple, please, and then Kyle has the last question.
Just quickly, Mike, you might want to talk to Randy about capital expenditures in the budget, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent short question. I love you for that, Bill. Kyle Davies, last question, and then I actually have one quick follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mike. Mike, what scares you about the county's future?
Great question. I think, boy, that's a great question. I'm trying to, yeah, that's a really good question. What scares me, I don't know if it's like, I would use the word scare. I just think that just for county government, I want this county government, I think we've had a really positive run, a lot of stability. I want this county government to be meaningful to the people that live here. And I think that there's been a lot of progress towards that. And I want that to keep going. And what would scare me is if we lose that connection and we have a county government that is no way connected to the folks that it serves. That's what scares me.
Excellent.
Kevin, you're last.
No, I want you to end on that. I thought that was just really frank and not teasing. I found that profound, and I thank you for saying it. So Mike, I want to thank you for taking your time this evening.
My pleasure. Yeah.
This was really, really helpful. You can tell by the vast number of questions you got that it was very informative. So just thank you for the time. And then I'll circle back with you about bringing you in again, or if you want to do that, or if you want to provide us something in writing, whatever.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I could come back again and just focus on that, that would be great. And then just in closing, this has been really interesting. I'm going to obviously follow along with the commission. Again, if you guys need anything, please let us know. I know, Kevin, that you're going to schedule time with the council to ask for more funds. But again, if you want us to cost stuff, figure out where stuff is, let me know. Happy to do it. So anyway, thank you guys. Have a good night. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very much. Okay, we're going to move very quickly. We've got 15 minutes left, and we will be stopping abruptly at 6:30. I would also like to try and get us back to a point where we actually get back to 2 hours again. And I want to, I did not crack the whip very hard tonight. And I just want to point out a couple of things that I'm going to start doing. One, if I call on you, you can speak. If you're not called upon, you don't speak. I'm just going to be really blunt right now. Two, if you have a follow-up question, you ask. You can't just keep going back and forth with the person. You have to say, you know, Mr. Chair, or you don't have to call me Mr. Chair. I don't care, but you just say, I have a follow-up question. And then if I recognize you, great. But if we've got 10 other people on the list, we can't do that. The final thing though is I really do hope I'm going to keep us at 2.5 hours for next week. But after that, I'd like to try and get us back. We'll see how next week goes. But I'd really like to get us back down to 2 hours. And please don't hate me if I'm a bull on some of these rules, but they're the rules that we adopted, and that's how we're going to actually have functioning meetings. So with that, town halls. Olivia or Catherine, do you want to remind us what our dates are? I'm totally brain dead, frankly. Not because of this meeting. You guys are good.
The first town hall we have scheduled for Friday the 12th from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. and then Saturday the 13th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Okay. And the goal for those, and I just really quickly, like just even like nodding, or if somebody has concerns, whatever, just let me know. What we were thinking for those was that they would begin with a brief overview of what the charter is and what it can be. One of the things that I found very interesting with King County's presentation this evening was their discussion of what they did with their charter, versus elected versus appointed, creating entire departments, and actually not what they just did this time, but what they've done in the past too. There are potential cost savings there and so on, and I really appreciate that. But our idea was, let's present some of the ideas that have been floated out there, but really what the charter is and what it isn't. So that I can't remember if it was Dick or someone earlier who said, you know, we don't want to hear from a bunch of people who tell us what policies they want, when that is very clearly not our prerogative. So my hope was that we'd spend, you know, 15, 20 minutes in the beginning of a 2-hour meeting, going over what we are and what we aren't, and then open it up for public comment. And limit people to 3 minutes per person, depending on how many people we have. Maybe people can speak again, but we really want to hear from as many people as possible. My other thing is I really want to have everyone's help on the commission, and I'm really going to push Mike and his team as well. We need to advertise the heck out of this. We need to make sure that everybody who could possibly be interested in any topic that we're talking about shows up at these town halls. So that's the thinking on the town halls. Are there any comments or any thoughts on that? Yeah, we'll go with Jane and then Maureen.
Quick question, Kevin. If you would like commissioners to support in sort of getting the word out, what would be sort of the limitations to how we do that? In other words, so for example, we have a very widely used community board called Lopez Rocks on the internet. And so everybody who lives here goes to that board regularly online. And I'm just wondering, there's a section on it that's elections. And so, or politics, I think it is there something like that? Can we put it in a notice up about this upcoming event? Or I'm just concerned about protocols here.
No, so, and Kyle just asked a similar question in the chat. So we can absolutely put this on social media, and we should also keep in mind that a majority of, I've said this before, I don't have the data specifically for San Juan County, but I do for Washington State and the country. A majority of people are actually getting a majority of their news from Facebook newsfeed right now, not any other means. And so if we solely advertise this in the paper, we lost. This has to be really broadly put out on social media. I would say in doing so, include the link and one of the phone numbers. That's what's most important. But just get it out there in any means we can. The official notice will go out, or has gone out, from us as a county entity. But each of us sharing that on our social media lists is really important. Maureen?
For the town halls, I have a big concern in terms of the number of areas that we are all trying to cover. I think we have an awful lot of them. And it's a hard thing to present to the public if we're not sure of where we're headed with them. And I would hope that as subcommittees, we can start paring them down and have a list that really reflects where we're headed to the voters with us. So we may get new ideas from town halls, but let's be judicious in it, because we can't do everything.
We're going to have to represent and listen to everybody, and represent ideas that we hear and bring them forward. But as we heard from Ron and Mac, as we've all discussed ourselves, we're going to need to narrow this down and fairly quickly. I believe that's one of the first tasks after the town halls. So we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to cut off comments on this and move us to public comment. So if there's anybody from the public here this evening who would like to speak to us, if you can turn your video on, if you have that ability, and if you're on just a phone, go ahead and just turn yourself off of mute and ask to be recognized. But if anybody would like to speak, we'd love to hear from you. Anyone? What is in the chat? Okay. All right, looks like we have no public, so we can take a couple more minutes on this discussion. Was there another question or comment on the town halls? Wow, if we adjourned early, I'd be really happy.
Real quick, I raised my hand.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
Olivia,
If you're going to be posting on social media, I would highly recommend posting about the town hall, the times, and also a link to our county charter specifically. That's the one thing that even our webpage on the county site, I forgot to write this in, is not included, is just a direct link to the charter. So people are like, what is the charter? What is this thing that we're going to be talking about? So we can start to do what Ron, suggested, which is to go talk to people, get out there, help them become informed. So when they get to the town hall, it's not just like a big suggestion. It's like, okay, they've read through the charter, fingers crossed. Just a quick suggestion for if you are going to be doing posting on social media.
Jane Fuller has asked, where's the direct link to the charter? Olivia, would you be willing to send that out to everybody after the meeting? Thank you.
Double thumbs up.
Okay, so we're going to go to Liz, and then David Dellendorf, and then David Anderson, and then Maureen. Never mind finishing early. Liz, please.
Kevin, I'd be interested in your answer to Jane's question about a Facebook page for this process.
I didn't see that. I believe we could set something up. I think that we have to, if it's an ongoing page, I think that if it's set up from the county charter commission as a county entity, I actually want to circle back with Randy and then find out specifically, because that would be a county page. So I need to look into that. I love the idea of us having one, but I think what is easy is each of us on our Facebook accounts just sharing stuff. And so we can, one of us writes something up, just share it, move it on. I know that is easily done.
Kevin, I have a follow-up.
Yeah, please.
So if so, then who's responsible for, updating it? And if we do it on our own Facebook pages, then doesn't that fall into that whole court documents? I don't know how to, in my question there.
No, so my experience of this would be in the legislature, where we very regularly, so for instance, if I had a bill that was going to be heard in a committee, I would send it out far and wide if I wanted people to pay attention to that hearing or come to that hearing. And that's what we're asking people to do. So that is legitimate and legal for us to do via social media. And there's actually case law on that as well. So you as an elected official can send out something saying, please come to this meeting. Here's the link to that meeting. And to Olivia's point, let's put the link, and where possible, have a link to the existing charter. We are discussing topics that the charter commissions of the past have not discussed. And so I would also say that in addition to the past charter, if you're so inclined, you might want to say these are some of the subjects being discussed, because I think that will get people's interest, both some supportive and some opposed. But I do think that sort of thing, and that's something that I plan on doing, is putting out there, hey, here's some ideas. If you're interested in this, you should show up at this meeting.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, one other thing, if there were a county Facebook page, we would be obligated to update it. And that's another concern of mine, is I'm not gonna recommend we put anything more on Catherine or frankly, or Olivia, and thank you, Olivia, for helping out as much as you have. And so if we do that, somebody else is going to need to take the lead on that. I wouldn't recommend it at this time. David Dellendorf.
Well, I was going to recommend it. I see your point though about the workload, but I was also going to say that I think we should have a standard communication. If we're going to put things on our personal Facebook pages, I think it would be helpful to have a standard communication that everybody passes on their Facebook page. The same thing, rather than everybody trying to recreate or create something that may or may not be accurate, may not be consistent, may have some legal issues with it. It would be nice if we had an official type of communication that we can send around and update it as needed. Thank you.
Okay, so in response to that, David, I think that's a good idea to have some consistency. However, each of us may have very different views on what we want to plug, and our personal Facebook pages are an opportunity to do that. So we may reach out and say, I may say, you know, I want all sorts of stuff that none of you guys want, but I want to get people encouraged to come and speak to that. And so that's a legitimate
follow up. I'm not proposing plugging anything. I'm just talking about what the issues are in consideration and notifications of meetings. Nothing advocacy. No, I agree with you on that.
Okay. Who was after David? I'm sorry, I got lost. Kyle, we'll go with Kyle. And then Dave Anderson. Actually, David Anderson, you were waiting. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I would really support getting an official Facebook account and a site. And it's something you can really push out a lot. So I just support this conversation going on, and hopefully we can actually do it. Thank you.
Kyle?
I just wanted to address, so all the committees are generating notes or minutes or something like that, and also recordings. I took some liberties and created folders in the Teams area for each committee. It may not be how you want to do it, but I think we're going to have management issues for that documentation. And right now I've posted anything that's been generated so far there, and offline somehow we'll do, if people want a training or a refresher, I'm happy to help with that. That was all.
Thank you, Kyle.
Anyone else?
I just have one quick note.
Hang on, you weren't called upon. I'm going to go with Janet and then Jane and then you, because you spoke out of turn.
Just one quick thing on the Facebook thing. So when I was in the school board, we ran a lot of levies and bonds, and it is a lot of work managing a Facebook page for these kind of issues. You have to have someone monitoring it all the time. So when comments and questions come up, they're not 24 hours after. It is a tremendous amount of work. And I think Kevin's idea of just pushing it out on our personal pages is going to cover a lot of landscape, unless someone really wants to take on a big project of managing a Facebook page for this.
Jane?
Thanks, Kevin. I just regarding the committees or subcommittees and how they function. I mentioned this, I think, in an email that you were copied on, Kevin, following our first Justice and Equity Committee meeting on Monday. I thought it could be useful just to have a few minutes at the next meeting to just talk about how we're all organizing ourselves and ensuring that there's some consistency in the way we're functioning. If people think that that would be useful to do. And also in terms of thinking about, the timelines for the work that we're working on, what are we trying to generate and by when, and just having some notion of where we're headed as subcommittees. So anyway, I just wondered if we could put that on the agenda next week, just to check in with each other.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And if Olivia or Catherine can help me remember it, that would be great. Maureen C., please. And Maureen, really? You're going to get the last comment of the night.
All I have to say is I just want to be sure that we publish the charter link that Randy sent, because that's the most current charter. There's about 15 different charters on the website that aren't right. So it's the one I sent around before we started meeting. And Olivia, you are incredible. Thank you so much for everything.
Okay. Yay, I second that. Okay, we got 1 minute. Did anybody have anything else desperate they needed to raise? Okay, Bob O'Connell, please. Bob O'Connell, please.
Please check the chat.
check the chat. Okay. Yes, I saw your comment
My
about.
last comment.
I saw your comment about checking with Randy regarding individual Facebook posts. If you're promoting a meeting, that is not a problem. You will still want to keep a note of when you posted something, though. If there is a FOIA, if there is a request for us to provide stuff, you will have to provide that on your Facebook page on this date, you forwarded something about a meeting. And so, yes, keep track of that. And Bob, thank you for raising that. I think it's important. But again, it's totally fine to promote a meeting. We do not want to, on social media, get into back and forth on different comments. The idea would be to promote the meeting and tell people to come and share their views with us when they're at the meeting. It is 6:30. I would very gladly accept a meeting to adjourn, or a motion to adjourn. And
Motion to adjourn. Seconded.
Moving second. Any discussion? Great. Okay, all those in favor? Great.
Hi.
Guys, thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Kevin.
Good night, everybody.
Everybody.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Catherine, are you able to quit recording?